How did I spend the PS4's North American launch day, you ask? I spent it by finally beating Armored Core 2. Seeing as Armored Core 2 was a launch game for the PS2, it seemed almost a fitting way for me to spend my day. In hindsight, the PS2's launch lineup was a little lackluster in its offerings. Since I was a mere high school student back in October 2000 when the system launched, I had very little chance of owning one. And even if I had the money at the time, the massive system shortages would have been another hindrance to my goal of owning one. Being deprived of experiencing the system on day one, I've since gone back and tried to collect all the launch games, and I'm pretty close to that goal too. The problem with the launch lineup wasn't that all the games were horrible, they just weren't revolutionary. The PS2 was a system people bought with the promise of future games like Metal Gear Solid 2 and Final Fantasy X. No one cared about Grand Theft Auto at that point because the series only hit it huge after Grand Theft Auto 3. There was very little in the launch lineup that screamed next generation from a design standpoint, with the exception of maybe SSX, but that's debatable. And though Armored Core 2 does fall into the classification of being a prettier PS1 game, having 3 games released previously on the PS1, it is still one of the best PS2 launch games.
The Earth has been destroyed by a war known as the Great Destruction. People have been forced to move underground to live. After a long struggle between giant corporations to gain control of the Earth, a new Earth government has finally formed, taking the power away from those corporations. As the new government is formed with the focus of cleaning up the Earth and making it livable for inhabitants, the memory of a pre-war effort to colonize Mars is brought back to the forefront, and immigration to the terraformed red planet is now encouraged. Like sharks swimming to blood in the water, the corporations again jump on the chance to regain power on a new planet, taking on the newly formed and nearly powerless Mars government known as the LLC. You are a Raven, part of a mercenary force of AC,
or in other words, giant mech,
operators for hire by the highest bidder, and you are pulled into the conflict between the corporations and the Mars government in a game of financial gain. Who will gain ultimate control as the story unfolds? Who cares? There's money to be made, ACs to customize, arena battles to be won, and a lot of stuff to blow up in the meantime. Nothing personal, you're a mercenary, and it's just business.
Right from the start of the game, you'll notice that Armored Core 2 is a tough game. From learning the difficult controls to the steep cost of parts to customize your AC versus the sometimes low payouts from the missions, to the strict ammo management in the missions, and even the sometimes grueling arena battles. Armored Core 2 isn't a game for those looking to casually jump in a giant mech and blow things up. Armored Core goes more for the sim feel versus, say, the more arcadey feel of games like Gun Griffin Blaze, which was another PS2 launch title. Gun Griffin Blaze is more suited for those looking for casual destruction in their mission-based action. Armored Core 2 forces players to claw, scratch, and fight their way all the way to the point where they can finally get ahead. Not only does the game force you to pay for ammo spent and damage occurred in each mission, but failing one mission can give you negative cash, putting you in a hole you can't easily climb out of. This is a game where I found myself saving after everything I did and reloading after every failed mission. I'm actually surprised the load and save screen images aren't burnt in my TV permanently. Something that most gamers forget, or perhaps were too young to remember, is that the PS1 wasn't released with an analog controller. Even after the dual analog controller and the DualShock controller were released for the system, developers were still slow to adopt them into their development, and even those who did still had to create control setups for the original controller as well. Only a small handful of games required a DualShock. Games like Ape Escape and RC Stunt Copter come to mind. So seeing as developers spent their development time in the PS1 era developing control schemes for both analog and digital controllers, it's not a surprise that early PS2 games didn't make full use of the DualShock controllers either. What makes the control scheme in Armored Core 2 so tough is that From Software completely ignored the analog sticks during development, making aiming and movement a lot tougher than it should be. I played through the entire game on the default control setting, which requires you to press the trigger buttons to look up and down. After years of being used to moving and aiming with the analog sticks, going back to a digital pad control scheme is really tough to get the hang of. However, after a while of playing, it finally clicks. The controls have a very steep learning curve to them, but eventually you get used to them, even if they never quite feel perfect. The weakness in the control is made up for with an auto-targeting system that works pretty well most of the time, but sometimes it acts up, targeting the wrong enemy. However, this is only a minor weakness and doesn't occur all the time in the game. The control weaknesses, however, become a practice in frustration when you have an enemy that moves fast and flies around a lot. The arena battles had me infuriated at times because of the sluggish feel of looking up and down with the trigger buttons. And because of the more sim feel, the sluggish turning speeds sometimes make it feel like you're a sitting duck being unfairly pelted, which can add to the frustration. All that being said, in typical fashion, only after I'd already beaten the game did I find out that the controls were 100% customizable. Though you still can't set it to analog control, I found that I could change it to a similar control scheme to games like Descent and Forsaken on the PS1, using the face buttons to move and the D-pad to aim. This makes controlling a lot easier and aiming a lot faster, although still not perfect. When you break down the missions in Armored Core 2, the game falls into the classification of a mission-based vehicle shooter. The 35 available missions, though having a good variety to them to keep the action from getting stale, remind me of games like the original Gun Griffin on the Saturn or even the Strike series, with the exception of those missions that have an exploration element to them that actually reminds me a little bit of dungeon crawl games like From Software's own King's Field series. The missions generally take place in large outdoor environments and have simple objectives like attack, defend, protect, or just destroy everything within the preset boundaries of the playing field. There is a good variety of enemies to take on, and the storyline will sometimes throw plot twists in there, giving you a surprise boss fight in what seemed to be a routine mission. Enough thought was put into the missions to keep things interesting at every turn. There is also an added strategic element in that, with the exception of a few long missions in the game, there are no health and no ammo refills at all. The ammo you have at the beginning of every mission is the only ammo you will have throughout the entire mission. This makes strategic use of your ammo of the utmost importance. This also affects the weapon you choose to take into each mission. That high-powered rifle may make a devastating explosion, but it only carries 40 rounds. And this mission has 100 enemies to kill. The same goes with your health. You may be a giant walking tank, but if you don't learn how to take cover, you're not going to make it through. Your ammo use and damage incurred in each mission is also deducted from the payout of each mission, so it is to your best interest to be conservative with both. Having limits on both adds to the strategic element of the game, but it also adds to the difficulty. Armored Core 2 also gives players an arena mode for those times when you get tired of the missions, thus adding more variety. In arena mode, or as I call it, virtual on mode, you fight your way through 49 enemies, up from rank 50 to the rank of 9 breaker or first place. Like Sega's Virtual On, this is a one-on-one fighting mode. You choose your field of battle and then go head on against your opponent, trying to kill them before they kill you. As you may imagine, taking on an arena opponent means facing the best and the hardest enemies in the game. Each opponent has their own strategy, their own AC loadouts, and they know how to move and dodge, meaning the difficulty amps up really quickly. I found that the combat training in the arena mode helped me face enemies in the missions. The best part of the arena mode is that you don't have to pay for the repairs to your AC unit, and you can continue indefinitely. Certain opponents will also send you parts via your in-game email upon defeating them. When you win, it's pure cash, and that can help you buy much needed parts and weapons for your AC. And that's where Armored Core really gets into the sim mode, the customization. The official number of possible combinations for your AC unit is 10 billion, but those numbers are a bit padded because they take color combinations into account. However, customization is where Armored Core truly shines. All the money you earn from the missions and in the arena goes to buy parts or weapons for your AC unit. There are hundreds of parts in this game, customized down to the minute simulated detail. You choose your AC's head, core, legs, arms, back unit, booster, generator, color, weapon loadouts, and etc. Artistic gamers can even create a custom emblem for their AC unit. Do you go for mobility, having a faster but weaker AC unit, hoping that the mobility will make up for the lower defense? Or do you go for the all-out beast that has high attack and high armor but low mobility? Or maybe somewhere in the middle. Do you want standard legs with your unit? Or maybe one with reverse joints? Perhaps tank tracks? Do you go for a good missile launcher and a machine gun? Or do you want dual plasma cannons mounted on your back? Better get some legs that can hold the weight. What kind of arms do you want? Better get light ones for mobility, or heavy armored ones if you're going to get pelted. Make sure you can carry the rifle you want. Or who needs a rifle? Why not forego that and get arms that are mounted missile launchers? There's also the loadout you use for missions and the ones you have strictly for arena battles. The customization options are nearly endless, and customization is what has always set the Armored Core series apart from other mech games. The complexity of it alone puts its depth leaps and bounds above similar games, but complexity demands a lot of attention and time on the part of the player. This will turn off those looking for a more user-friendly, casual experience in their mech games. The depth of the series is also why the Armored Core series has a rabid cult following, but has never seen huge mainstream success either. When you finally beat all 35 missions, they open up for you to replay. Or if you missed a mission because you often have a choice of what missions you take and for what faction, meaning some missions disappear if you choose to work for the opposite faction, you will have the option to finally complete it. This adds a little bit more replay value to the game. That being said, if you tire of the campaign missions and tire of the arena battles against the computer, you can take your souped up mech and fight against your friend's mech in a two-player split-screen battle. This also adds to the longevity of the game. There is also an option for a system link battle, but unless you have two early model PS2 systems with the FireWire port, this option isn't available to use. Graphically speaking, graphics hounds won't find a whole lot here to please their eyes. Armored Core 2 was a first-generation PS2 game. The PS2 was a system that was very difficult for developers to get a handle on in the beginning because of its strange architecture. Though the visuals are clean, they still suffer from a lot of first-generation PS2 graphic issues, like the dreaded jaggies because of the lack of anti-aliasing. The game also has a tendency to slow down when the action gets heavy, which in hindsight isn't a big deal in a PS2 game, but at the time, when the system launched, we all thought that slowdown would be a thing of the past. Overall, the game still looks decent, but definitely didn't help quench the fires of the fanboy arguments at the time that the Dreamcast has better graphics than the PS2. I still can't help but wonder if maybe this was someone's personal introduction to PS2 graphics because it was a launch game. Not everyone had a Dreamcast at the time, or a gaming PC with a Voodoo 3 3D accelerator. So I can actually see someone's eyes melting if this was their first jump from the grainy PS1 or blurry N64 graphics into the next generation. It seems pretty simplistic by today's standards, but it would have been pretty magical for the viewer at the time. Just one of those things I ponder at the release of the PS4 yet again. The bottom line, even though I have owned the original Armored Core and Project Phantasma for over a decade on the PS1, Armored Core 2 is actually the first game in the series that I finally took the time to play. Even though I thoroughly enjoyed my time with the game over the past week or so, I realize that it's more for the niche gamer. With its awkward controls, deep customization options, and high difficulty, those who tough through the game will find a deep and rewarding experience. If you're looking for something different or have always had an interest in playing the Armored Core series, give this one or one of the other games in the Armored Core series a try. All things said and done, this is a great series, and Armored Core 2 would have been a great buy for early PS2 gamers.
If you fail, you die. You die. You die.